Shabbos and get Yom Tov for the holiday of Shavuos. That's on Matzah Shabbos on Saturday night. And if you haven't booked in yet for our lunch, you can book. For our Shavuos night dinner and for our all-night learning program. Please come along and celebrate Shavuos as it's meant to. And the most important thing is to come and listen to the Ten Commandments being read on Sunday at 10:30. Men, women, children, infants, as we were at first standing at Sinai, receiving the Torah. So it happens every year. And this year is the 3,334th year since the giving of the Torah at Sinai. One of the individuals that is very much connected to Shavuos is David HaMelech, King David. He passed away in Shavuos, and it's quite clear in many of the holy books that David actually was born on Shavuos as well. So it's a day associated with King David. Now, of course, King David is a great tzaddik, very righteous person who gave us the incredible book of Tehillim, Psalms, that really express the feelings of every Jew in all kinds of circumstances, when you're down, when you're up, when you're longing, when you need help. Tehillim is the place to go for Hashem to give you that support and that help. But there's a fascinating distinction between the first two kings of Israel, King Shaul and King David. King Shaul was a tzaddik too, head and shoulders above the rest. And yet he made a mistake. And because of the mistake he made, he lost his kingdom. King David, on the other hand, made mistakes, and they seem to be quite serious mistakes. And nevertheless, he remained the king, he and his children, and until Mashiach will be a descendant of King David. Why this difference? Why is it that King Shaul messed up once and he lost his kingdom, whilst King David messed up, the Talmud says, twice, and he didn't lose his kingdom? So there's two answers I'd like to give. The first answer is that of the Maharsha. The Maharsha says that the difference between Shaul and David is that when Shaul sinned, what happened was God told him to eradicate the nation of Amalek, who were the original anti-Semites, and kill their animals and their king, every part of them. And he didn't kill the animals, and he didn't kill the king. And as we come along, that night the king cohabited with a woman, and actually that becomes the progenitor of ultimately Haman and all the anti-Semites of Jewish history. But Shaul had mercy on the king and had mercy on the animals. When Shmuel comes to him and says, the prophet Shmuel comes to him and says, what happened? Shaul comes out and says, I did what God told me. And Shmuel says, but what's this king? What's up with the voices of the animals? He says, oh, the people had mercy on them. They wanted to bring them offerings for God. And Shmuel then says, but isn't it better to listen to what you're told than to bring offerings? And Shaul says, okay, you're right, I sinned, but I was listening to the people. So he never really acknowledged that he did the wrong thing. He blamed others. He didn't sin, he blamed others. Whereas when King David, what happened there, of course, was the custom of the army in the time of King David is that anyone who went to the army gave his wife a divorce, so that if he doesn't come back, she's not guna, she's not stuck to him. And if he doesn't come back and she doesn't know what happened to him, so she could get on with her life. So Uriah the Hittite gave his wife Bathsheba a divorce, went to the front, and David saw her and fancied her, and then he found that she was pregnant. Ultimately, he sent Uriah back to the front lines, and Uriah first he came back. King David called for him and says, go home. And he said, what? I should go home whilst all the people are on the front lines, and my master Yoav, who was the chief of staff, is on the front lines, and the servants of my master, meaning David, are on the front lines, and I should not be. And the Talmud tells us that this expressed a clear diminishing of the honor and respect that a king is meant to be held. He speaks of Yoav as the master rather than King David, and because of that, he was deserving of the penalty that goes to someone who denounces the king. And therefore he sent him to the front lines. And as he was in the front lines again, he was killed. The question, of course, is, so then what happened was that the prophet comes to King David and says, I'll give you an analogy. I'm going to tell you a story, not an analogy. I want to tell you a story. There was this rich man, had many sheep, and this poor guy, his neighbor, had one sheep. And then a visitor came to the rich man, and he wanted to make him a sheep. So he went and stole the sheep from the poor man and made it for his neighbor, for his guest. And David got really angry. Who's this man? I want to punish him. He should pay 4 or 5 times as much. So when then the prophet says to David, that man is you. He had all these wives, and then you have to go take the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And immediately as David hears this, he says, Chatasi, I have sinned. So what David did was he acknowledged his sin right away. No excuses, no if, what's, when's about it. He acknowledged his sin. Our Shaul did not acknowledge his sin. And that's a major difference. That's why David was able to get on, because it's not so much the sin, it's the cover up, as they say, right? It's when you don't acknowledge it. But David acknowledged it right away and said, I'm sorry. And he lived all his life saying sorry. The Tehillim is one big expression of sorry. So that's the one answer. And the other answer is, the Rebbe wrote this in a letter, actually, to a group of teachers in the 50s in Israel. There was a teacher strike, and some teachers in Chabad schools wanted to join the strike. And the Rebbe heard about it. He sent them a letter. He says, you know what the difference in King Shaul and David was? Why it is that Shaul was not forgiven whilst David was? He says, because in David, it was a personal matter. By Shaul, it was part of his role, of who he was meant to be. In other words, Shaul's failure was in the area of his responsibility as a king. He was told to do something for the security of the Jewish people, and he failed. Failed because he was mistaken, whatever it is, failed in judgment, but he failed in his area of responsibility. If you fail in your area of responsibility, then it's taken away from you. King David failed personally. It wasn't his area of responsibility. It was his personal responsibility. And for that, he suffered a lot. As a person, as an individual, he did suffer a lot. But as far as a king, he didn't fail as a king. That's why the Rebbe says to these teachers, when you have these children seeing that the teachers are more interested in the financial gain than in educating the children, what kind of message does this give the children? And this is the area of your responsibility. This is what your role is. So in life, there's, that we have to do all the good things, but there's some areas that are particularly our role. There was someone who had a very difficult time, shalom bayis, and peace in his home, had a hard time with treating his wife properly or fighting with his wife or whatever it might be. And the Rebbe wrote to him a fascinating letter, and he said to him, listen, in your case, this is your area. Our souls come back on this earth to rectify one area in particular. Yes, we have to do everything, and there's the regular challenges in every area of life, so we have free choice. But there's one area in particular that is our role and our mission in this world, and that's where the evil inclination puts all of its effort to make it hard for us. So how do we know what our mission in life really is, what our role is? Well, circumstances is one, talents and abilities are another, or level of difficulty is another. We see something that's really hard for us, might be that's exactly we should put our focus and attention. So in summary, 2 distinctions between Shaul and David. A, owning up, acknowledging what one did wrong. That's just a way of freedom. I've done the wrong thing, chatasi, acknowledging it lets you go on. Whereas if you hide and you say, I never did anything and so on, that's the worst possible thing. And secondly, is it your main focus that you messed up in, or is it something personal or on the side? That is a huge distinction and difference. We don't necessarily have perfect people, but in the area of their responsibility, they have to be at the top of where they could be. So that's how we should learn from King David and the benefit of King David over King Shaul. I'd like to wish you a good Shabbos and a happy Shavuot.